Hello, everyone. My name is Samir Kassem. I am a junior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst studying psychology and linguistics. I'm also a research assistant for one of the psychology department's labs, which is the FAM lab headed by Dr. Evelyn Mercado. FAM stands for Family Relationships, Effective Science, and Minority Health. And today I'll be presenting to you about some research we have been conducting, which focuses on the minority health aspect of our lab, and that is examining the impact of racism on stress physiology among Latinx parent youth dyads. Now, I think it's important to start with the big question that our study is looking to explore, which is how does racism get under the skin? And when I say under the skin, I mean what are the biological effects of experiencing racial discrimination, especially when these discriminatory and racist experiences are chronic and occur regularly? How does this impact the long-term health of those who experience it? Studies have demonstrated that one way racism can get under the skin is by activating the body's stress response. When we experience a stressful event, especially an event that is uncontrollable and unexpected, our HPA axis is activated. Think of the HPA axis as a network within our bodies responsible for protecting us when we're in danger. When it's activated, the HPA axis releases the hormone cortisol, and cortisol is like the body's natural caffeine. It keeps us on high alert until the danger passes. Now, normally cortisol is really important for us. It helps us wake up in the morning and stay active throughout the day. Cortisol follows a diurnal rhythm where its levels rise as we wake up, then peak about 30 minutes after waking, and then gradually fall as we go about our day. And then the cycle is repeated day after day. However, when stressful events are prolonged or occur regularly, these levels may be altered. As the HPA axis is activated again and again, cortisol levels are forced to stay elevated, and the body may habituate to this constant state of alertness. This may lead to health problems such as chronic stress and mental health issues. Now, research has shown that when people regularly experience racial discrimination, both in interpersonal and institutional forms, these experiences can act as a chronic stressor, which over time may contribute to altered cortisol levels and other health problems. Now, although this link between racism and its biobehavioral effects has been shown in other US minority groups, when it comes to the Latinx community, little research has been done. Even though the Latinx community is the largest racial ethnic minority group in the United States, and they face interpersonal and institutional racial discrimination in contexts like education, housing, healthcare, and labor. A survey conducted in 2021 suggested that about half of US Latinos had experienced some sort of discrimination in the year prior to the survey. And furthermore, less research has been done on how racism may affect Latino youths, even though younger Latinos are more likely to report experiences of discrimination than older Latinos. So, knowing that facing discrimination is a prevalent stressor among the Latinx community, we want to expand upon previous research in this field to include Latinx persons, both adults and youths. And also, we wanted to analyze these effects in an area of the country where less research has been done. Most of the research on the Latinx community has been conducted in the southwestern part of the United States. Yet the Latinx community is incredibly diverse and faces different contexts and challenges depending on the region. And lastly, we wanted to analyze some of the questionnaires we used in this study. These are validated questionnaires that have been used in past research to measure experiences of racism and discrimination. But again, not as much research has been done using these questionnaires with Latino youths and with Latinos in the northeastern United States. We wanted to see if these questionnaires would be able to capture the true experiences of the community we worked with, and if they do not, potentially suggest edits and additions for future research. So essentially, there are two variables that we wanted to compare. The first variable being experiences of racial and ethnic discrimination, and the second variable being cortisol levels across the day. To measure experiences of discrimination, we sat down with participants and administered a survey that included scales designed to measure perceived racial and ethnic discrimination. The survey also asked questions about the participants' racial and ethnic identity, and also included scales to measure anxiety, depression, stress, and social support. However, for the purposes of this study, we focused on the three highlighted scales since they not only specifically measure experiences of discrimination, but also measure three different types of discrimination. So now let's go over our three scales. The Everyday Experiences of Discrimination scale measures experiences of interpersonal overt racism, while the Racial Microaggression scale measures experiences of interpersonal covert racism in 6 different subscale categories. And finally, the Major Experiences of Discrimination scale measures institutional racism. This last scale was especially interesting to us since most studies looking at the biobehavioral effects of racism have focused on interpersonal experiences of discrimination. However, more research is needed on the effects of institutional racism. Now for our second variable, cortisol levels can be obtained through saliva samples. So we asked participants to collect their own saliva at 4 different times throughout one day. We chose these specific time points because they follow the daily cycle of cortisol that was mentioned earlier. One sample would be taken immediately after waking up, another about 30 minutes after waking up, another sample in the afternoon, and one sample right before going to bed. So now let's talk a little bit about our participant demographics and our study's protocol. We're still recruiting participants and collecting data, but so far we've recruited 13 families from Hampton and Hampshire counties in western Massachusetts that self-identified as Latino, Latina, or Latinx and have at least one 13 to 19-year-old adolescent in the home. Among the adolescents, about half were female and half were male, and we had one transgender participant as well, while for the parents the majority were female. The mean age for the adolescents was about 15 years old, and the mean age for the parents was about 42 years old, and the majority of the participants were of Puerto Rican descent. For our study's protocol, we met at the participants' homes to conduct an interview and take some anthropometric measurements like height, weight, and waist and hip circumference, and we collected one saliva sample from both the parent and their adolescent, and then left saliva collection kits so they could collect their own saliva on another day. And for their participation, we compensated each participant with $60. So now let's go through our results scale by scale. We analyzed the associations between a participant's score on a specific scale to their cortisol levels at each collection time point throughout the day. Starting with the Everyday Discrimination Scale, our adolescent sample scores were weakly to moderately associated with their cortisol levels across the day. However, our adult sample showed moderate to strong negative associations across the day, but all of these results were non-significant. Next, we have the Racial Microaggression Scale, which remember had 6 subscales that measure the stressfulness of 6 different types of microaggressions. We looked at the associations between participants' cortisol levels and their scores in each individual subscale, so this table just shows the results from the invisibility subscale. Now, across all of the subscales, adolescent scores were weakly associated with their cortisol levels. Parents also showed weak to moderate correlations across most of the subscales. However, one significant association was found in the parents' invisibility subscale result. At the second saliva collection time, which is 30 minutes after waking, parents showed a significant negative association between their scores and cortisol levels. A negative association suggests that higher discrimination scores may be associated with lower cortisol levels. Parents also showed moderate to strong negative associations at the rest of the saliva collection time points in this subscale's results. And finally, we have the Major Discrimination Scale. Here we see that for adolescents, major discrimination was only significantly associated with cortisol levels when they first woke up. Specifically, the more discrimination they experienced, the lower their awakening cortisol level. While none of the correlations for parents were significant, the R coefficients were moderate size, suggesting that if we had a bigger sample size, there would be significant negative associations between major experiences of discrimination and their cortisol levels across the day. Hopefully, we can see more significant associations as we continue recruiting more families and collecting more data. So, to summarize from these preliminary results, regardless of scale used, most of the associations between discrimination and cortisol were non-significant for adolescents, except for major discrimination and awakening cortisol. On the other hand, parents' experiences with discrimination seem to be negatively associated with cortisol levels, but a larger sample size would be needed to potentially get significant associations. Remember that data collection is currently underway. Some other limitations worth mentioning include the fact that the saliva was collected by the participants themselves, so we could not control for exact saliva collection times. The survey interview is also quite long. It takes almost an hour to complete, so participants may have had trouble paying attention at certain points, and this could lead to less authentic responses. So what's next? I just wanted to highlight some questions that came up during our early analysis. As we continued working with the data, we asked ourselves, why did association strength vary across scales in the parent sample? Remember that parents showed weaker associations in the racial microaggression scales than in the other two scales. We also wanted to explore if these scales were able to capture the experiences of Latino youths in our sample. In what context did we see youths experiencing the most discrimination, and are these contexts well represented within the scales? During interviews, research assistants also took field notes of participants' comments and suggestions about the questionnaire. It would be worthwhile to look back at these notes and see what we can learn. I'll be further discussing these questions as well as future directions for this study at the Mass URC Research Highlights panel later this month. Now, before I finish, I'd like to thank my faculty sponsor, Dr. Evelyn Mercado, who once again is the head of the FAM Lab. I'd also like to thank Dr. Irene Martinez from the Department of Public Health and Health Sciences, who's been working with the FAM Lab as we conduct this research. And thank you to the researchers in the FAM Lab who helped me organize this presentation and analyze the results, including Eileen Fernandez, who's a graduate student in the Developmental Psychology program, and Maria Ramos and Leslie Hernandez, who are undergraduate research assistants in our lab. And finally, I'd like to extend a special thank you to all the families who participated and the communities of Western Massachusetts who have helped get the word out about our study. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts, comments, and questions.